voting laws are essential to maintaining democracy, but throughout U.S. history, some laws have been more amusing than practical. Whether they were products of their time or just plain odd, these voting regulations might make you chuckle. Here are the top 10 funniest voting laws in U.S. history. 1. Indiana, intoxicated voters. In Indiana, it was once illegal for anyone to bet, wager, or offer intoxicating liquors as a reward for voting or abstaining from voting. This law was passed to keep political parties from using alcohol as an incentive to sway votes. It's funny to think that at one point, you might have been offered a drink for your ballot. 2. Texas, horse riding poll workers. In the early 20th century, Texas had a law that required poll workers to ride horses to polling locations in rural areas to collect ballots. While this may have been a logistical necessity at the time, it paints a humorous picture of officials on horseback, trotting from town to gather votes. 3. Massachusetts, Sunday voting. In colonial Massachusetts, a law prohibited voting on Sundays due to the Puritan influence on politics. This law seems humorous in today's context, where early and mail-in voting allow for more flexibility, but back then, it was meant to preserve the sanctity of the Sabbath. 4. Florida, chicken voting. In a small Florida town in the early 1900s, chickens were allegedly registered to vote as a joke by mischievous citizens. While the local government quickly caught on, the idea of poultry casting ballots is a laughable moment in U.S. voting history. 5. Ohio, straight ticket requirement. For a time, Ohio voters were required by law to vote a straight ticket, meaning they had to choose all candidates from the same party. This law sparked much confusion and frustration, with many voters accidentally voting for a party they didn't support. 6. Tennessee, no booze on election day. Tennessee passed a law that prohibited the sale of alcohol on election days to prevent people from voting under the influence. This quirky law was meant to maintain the integrity of the voting process, but it's also a funny glimpse into how much election day drinking was apparently a problem. 7. New Jersey, clergy restrictions. In the late 1800s, New Jersey had a law that barred clergy members from serving as election officials. The concern was that religious leaders might unduly influence their congregations. While the rule has long since been abolished, it's amusing to think that priests and ministers were once excluded from the democratic process. 8. Louisiana, voting in the dark. Louisiana once required polls to open before dawn and close before sunset, meaning voters sometimes had to cast ballots in the dark. With no electricity in rural areas at the time, it's funny to imagine voters fumbling in the early morning to find the voting booth. 9. Kentucky, men-only primaries. In Kentucky's Democratic primaries during the early 1900s, only men were allowed to vote, even after women gained the right to vote in general elections. The logic behind this exclusion is baffling, but it highlights the strange voting rules that persisted long after the 19th Amendment. 10. Wyoming, no buttons or stickers. In Wyoming, there was once a law that prohibited voters from wearing campaign buttons or stickers to polling places. This was meant to prevent campaigning near voting booths, but it's amusing to think that you could get in trouble for simply showing support for your favorite candidate with a sticker. These quirky laws reveal just how much voting in the US has evolved over the years. While they may seem amusing now, they offer a fascinating glimpse into the history of the American electoral process.